to Tulip Siddiq to close the case for the proposition.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a world where Donald Trump is President of the United States, when Britain is leaving the European Union, when Spain is hanging on to Catalonia by just a thread, you could be forgiven for thinking that populism is the only force to make real change. Make America great again, they shouted. Take back control, they demanded. Reclaim our streets, they urged. And the public seemed to be listening. The Harvard Kennedy School said that the average vote share for populist parties in Europe in local and parliamentary elections has more than doubled since the 1960s, from 5% to 13%, mostly at the expense of centrist leaders. Centrist and important people are taking their movement to new heights, claiming to speak for the people, taking on vested interests. So in some ways, the motion today may seem like a foregone conclusion, like populism is the unstoppable force in politics, the only thing that can change matters at the moment. But the problem with this proposition is that populism is the most confused, overused, and abused term in political history, claiming victories that do not belong to it, being blamed for failures where they have no responsibility. Populism, when actually analysed on its own, has surprisingly underwhelming consequences. It's a bit like saying a megaphone can make some noise without someone shouting a loud message inside it. Yes, populism can be a tool that amplifies a message, but what really matters is the message itself. So, my problem is that populism is solely defined by the ambition of a populist leader to represent the people against the establishment. Let's take our favourite MEP, Nigel Farage. The man who loves Britain, married a German, works in Brussels and cites Putin as his political hero. That's Nigel Farage. When he talks about the results of the referendum, he says, real people's victory, real people took back control. Somehow, the 48% of us that voted to remain are not real. Those are the words of a true populist. And I take great issue with people who say, my leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is a populist leader, or Bernie Sanders is a populist leader. If you have policies that are different to the opposition party, that does not make you a populist. If you talk about taxing the super rich to fund public services, if you talk about renationalizing certain amenities, in my opinion, that makes you a pretty progressive politician.
Point of information.
Yes.
Does your name not being chanted at Glastonbury not make you a populist leader?
If you think... I chanted Billy Joel at the last Glastonbury. I don't think he's the leader. Look, I'm going to take this point head on, actually. If you think Jeremy Corbyn is a populist leader who can make genuine change, I have been in opposition now for 2 years. I've hardly won a single vote in Parliament because I hate to break it to you, Jeremy, you didn't actually win the election. So if you want to make real change, you've got to be in government. And that, I honestly think, is the only way to make real change. Let me go back to populism and about some of history's most atrocious individuals who've harnessed populism and then committed great injustice and harm along the way. It is not enough to simply pin that on populism and to say that the communism or fascism should be given a free pass to try to prove the power of populism. In my speech today, I want to expose how flawed the concept of populism actually is and expose the people and the leaders who exploit, bait people to give them an illusion of change. And most importantly, I want to touch on something a previous speaker already said, how lots of people who are populist leaders then become part of the establishment themselves. So, my first point is going to be about why populism fails in the face of the declared enemy, which is the establishment. Populists will often complain about how the establishment is controlling the economy, banks, government, and the sad truth is, they probably are. So, we're going to talk about Donald Trump. Donald Trump and his amateur populism when he ran for leader. In his campaign, he committed to everything. Trade, we're going to fix that. Healthcare, we're going to fix that. And what have you actually seen of Donald Trump in terms of real change? The only thing I've seen is him tweeting with his tiny hands and also tweeting lots of abuse. So, take for example, Obamacare, repealing it. His own Senator John McCain voted that down. Think about climate change denial. It's been ignored by successive state legislatures across the country. Think about the wall. He kept talking about the wall. He's no closer to building it. And trust me, the Mexicans will not be paying for the wall. And the other thing is, he talked a lot about draining the swamp. Let's drain the swamp. Trump kept talking about that. And he talked about getting rid of nepotism. He talked about getting rid of corruption. If you look at Donald Trump's cabinet, around it, he has people who financed his campaign. The collective wealth of Donald Trump's cabinet is more than the GDP of the 39 poorest countries in the world. So don't get taken when people talk about an illusion of change. The next problem I have with populism is the straitjacket theory that limits pragmatism, flexibility. If you want to make real change in government, you've got to build barriers, you've got to work with the other side. Even Tony Blair, at the height of New Labour in 1999, actually said that I have the scars on my back from being in government. If you look at Prime Minister Modi, he denounced populism because he said the only way to make effective change in government is to actually work with the forces around us. And the other thing I want to talk about is populism. It inevitably implodes because when you claim to represent the people, everyone, the range of opinions eventually overwhelm the superficial similarities that you had at the beginning. I'm going to go back to UKIP. UKIP, who initially did very well. In 2014, in the European elections, they won more seats than any other party. You know, in this election just gone by, they got 2% of the vote. The party is splitting. They've had leader after leader, and one of their leaders only lasted a fortnight. And Brexit. We can't talk about populism without analysing Brexit. In terms of Brexit, yes, if you look at it in isolation of did they win the referendum, yes, Brexit won. The Leave campaign won the referendum. But if Aaron Banks was here, I would ask him, so where is that quick deal that you talked about? Where is the fact that we're liberating the economy when the sterling is low and inflation is high? Where is that £350 million that you kept talking about? In my opinion, unless the Leave campaign can deliver all the promises that they made during the campaign, that is not real change, in my opinion. And finally, Oxford, think very carefully. Think very carefully about when people are listening to this debate. What do you want them to think? Do you want them to think that real change is achieved by quick fix slogans? Or do you want them to think that real change is achieved when you have pragmatic, flexible conversation, when you build barriers, when you have thought-provoking arguments, when you actually put time into making policies? That is what I want you to think about, Oxford. I'm not saying populism can't create an upheaval. I'm not saying they can't change rhetoric. What I am saying is that if you want real change, you've got to put in hard work. You've got to put in time. You've got to put in some pragmatism. And sometimes you need to put in hope over fear. Thank you.